My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 26, and just last week, I slipped on the purple gown of the University of Washington, Seattle, and walked across the stage to receive my master's degree in public health with the highest honors. But do you know what the bitter part was? The 3 VIP seats reserved for my family sat empty. They weren't caught up in an emergency or anything unavoidable. They were in Hawaii, smiling for pictures on the beach. When I texted in our family group chat, "My graduation's on Saturday, hope you can make it," my younger sister replied, "We're already in Hawaii, maybe next time." My mother added, "Don't make this all about you again." I simply replied with 4 words. Understood. All my life, I've been used to being placed behind my sister from the days in elementary school when I won awards but my parents never came, to paying for my own tuition while Sophie had everything covered. But this time, the emptiness still stung. I'm telling this story not to complain, but to speak to anyone who's ever been abandoned by their own family. You are not alone. You can stand up and build a life of value that no one can deny. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you, those watching this, where are you from, and have you ever been hurt by your own family in this way? Share it, because your story might just help someone feel less alone. I was born and raised in Tacoma, a small port city about an hour's drive south of Seattle, where quiet streets run along the bay and winters are always damp and cold. Our family home sat in an aging neighborhood where neighbors knew each other by name, and summer afternoons often carried the sound of kids playing ball in the street. From the outside, my childhood might have looked like any other school nearby, friends on the same block, a complete family. But beneath that appearance was a truth I realized early on in my parents' eyes. Sophie and I never started from the same line. I was the independent one. Low maintenance, while Sophie was the golden girl of the family, the center of every priority. From elementary school onward, I grew used to holding certificates or trophies in my hands with no parents in the crowd to take a photo. I won first place in the county's writing contest, competed in state-level math tournaments, joined the science club, but the seats for my family were always empty. My parents said they were busy, but I knew better. They were at another stage, where Sophie, in her frilly dress and bright smile, was competing in the town beauty pageant. I still remember presenting at the state science fair while the whole family drove to Spokane to cheer Sophie on at her volleyball finals. My moments passed in quiet, while hers were met with cheers and confetti. In high school, the gap didn't shrink, it grew wider. When Sophie became a senior, my parents hired a professional photographer for her prom, ordered a custom dress from a well-known shop in Seattle, and hosted an after-prom party at home. When I competed in the state debate championship, my victory was captured in a single blurry photo taken by a classmate. They didn't even try to hide the favoritism, it was simply how things were. Every time I asked why there was such a difference, the answer was always the same. "You're stronger, Natalie. You don't need us the way Sophie does." It sounded like a compliment, but it was really just an excuse for them to keep being absent. The 1-hour drive from Tacoma to Seattle had never been a problem when it came to Sophie's schedule. They were more than willing to drive 2 hours for her photo shoots in the suburbs, or to attend her school sports tournaments. But when I expressed my wish to attend the University of Washington in Seattle to pursue public health, the reaction was an immediate wave of disapproval. My father folded his arms, his voice firm. "That field doesn't make much money. You should study something more practical." My mother was more direct. "Stay close to home and go to community college. It's cheaper and safer." I explained that I had secured a scholarship and could work part-time to cover my expenses, but they shook their heads. "Why make life harder for yourself?" In the end, I submitted my application and accepted a partial scholarship without saying much more. I moved to Seattle, rented a room in a small apartment near Capitol Hill, and juggled my studies with jobs at the library and a cafe to pay rent and living expenses. During my 4 years of undergrad, they came to Seattle only twice, once to drop off a few old household items, and once because Sophie had a photo shoot scheduled in the city. My bachelor's graduation happened to the sound of applause from friends and colleagues at the library, while the family seats stayed empty. After graduation, I didn't return to Tacoma. Instead, I secured a research assistant position at a hospital in Bellevue, just a 30-minute drive from Seattle. I worked there for 3 years, gaining experience and building a strong enough portfolio to apply for the master's program in public health at the University of Washington. When I received my acceptance letter along with an almost full tuition waiver, I sent the news to my family. The response was a mix of silence and skepticism. What job will that lead to? When will you finally settle down? So, you're planning to stay in Seattle forever? There was no congratulations, no small gathering to celebrate. Throughout my 2 years in the master's program, the signs of favoritism never stopped. When Sophie switched to a new marketing firm, the family threw a BBQ and invited relatives. When I was invited to speak at a public health conference in Portland, the only reaction I got in the group chat was a single thumbs-up emoji. They still repeated the same line. "You're more independent, you don't need as much as your sister." Over time, that phrase became an invisible wall, keeping me outside their circle of priority. Their Hawaii trip had been planned since spring, scheduled exactly during my graduation week. When I reminded them of the date and time of the ceremony, my father only said, "The tickets are booked, it's hard to change now." I understood then, just as I had so many times before, that the decision had been made long before the conversation even began. The fact that I had completed my master's degree, a goal I had worked relentlessly to achieve, still wasn't enough to make their priority list. And even though I was used to it, it still felt like an old wound being pressed open. The favoritism had never gone away. It had only shifted in form from absence at my important days to dismissing my biggest accomplishments, from the excuse of "you're more independent" to plans that somehow always overlapped with my milestones. And this time, when I saw the words, "Don't make this about you" on my phone screen, I knew I would no longer try to rationalize it. June in Seattle always carries its own kind of chill, not the endless drizzle of winter, but the kind of breeze from Puget Sound that slips through every layer of a coat, carrying dampness and the faint scent of salt from the sea. I usually started my mornings with a short walk through a few blocks from my apartment in Capitol Hill to the bus stop, watching the deep green maple leaves tremble in the wind, then heading over to Bellevue to wrap up my work before taking a few days off from the hospital for graduation. The colleagues in Bellevue had been an important part of this journey. They had seen me balancing work and study, running back and forth between classrooms, labs, and project meetings. When I sent them invitations, their responses were faster and warmer than anything I had ever received from my family. "We'll be there, absolutely. We wouldn't miss your day for the world." I also invited a few close friends in Seattle, people who had been by my side from the early, shaky days of the master's program, sharing with me every sleepless night spent on reports, every shaky breath before a presentation. My guest list wasn't long, but every name on it was a genuine connection, not just a relationship that existed on a birth certificate. One afternoon, I stopped by the campus gift shop to buy my graduation gown and cap. The gown was a deep navy purple with golden trim, the square cap with a matching tassel. I tried it on in the fitting room, looked at myself in the mirror, and couldn't help but smile. I didn't buy any elaborate accessories, just kept it simple and clean, the way I had moved through this academic journey, quiet but steady. When I brought it home, I hung the gown and cap on the wooden hook by my bedroom door. Each time I passed by, I would pause for a few seconds, running my fingers lightly over the smooth fabric, as if to remind myself that every effort had brought me here. I knew my family wouldn't come. Not because the 1-hour drive from Tacoma to Seattle was too far, but because in their list of priorities, my graduation had never ranked above their own plans. Still, I held onto a fragile thread of hope. Maybe they would change their minds at the last minute. Maybe they would show up in the crowd unexpectedly, like in those family movie scenes everyone's seen. I didn't dare expect it, but I hadn't completely put the hope to rest either. The week before the ceremony was a blur of final tasks, confirming guest seating, sending reminder emails to those who had RSVP'd, preparing a short thank you speech in case I was asked to speak. I also had to finalize a project report to hand over temporarily to a colleague. In the evenings, I would sit at my desk, going over documents while occasionally glancing at my phone lying face down beside me, waiting for a new notification from the family group chat. But there was nothing, just scattered messages about the weather in Tacoma or stories centered around Sophie. The night before the ceremony, a light rain fell over Seattle. The soft patter on the apartment's awning mixed with the warm yellow glow spilling from the windows across the street. I sat curled in an armchair, wrapped in a thin blanket, with Willow, my calico cat I had adopted in my first year of the master's program, curled into my lap. In the warmth of the room, I picked up my phone and scrolled through the family group chat once more. The most recent message was a photo of my parents and Sophie standing in front of the Honolulu airport gate, a large sign behind them reading, "Welcome to Hawaii." They were all beaming, holding plane tickets and brand new suitcases. Not a single line mentioned me. Not a single wish of luck for tomorrow. I stared at the photo for a moment, trying not to let myself sink into that familiar hollow feeling. I set the phone down on the table, stood up to smooth out my graduation gown, and checked the bag with my cap and tassel. Then I turned off all the lights, leaving only a small lamp in the corner, slipped under the blanket, and lay still in the dark. In my mind, I could still see the image of empty family seats, but somewhere inside, there was still a faint, hazy light, a small hope that tomorrow might be different. I closed my eyes, listened to the rain outside the window, and told myself that no matter what happened, I would walk across that stage with my head held high. June in Seattle always carries its own kind of chill, not the relentless rain of winter, but breezes from Puget Sound that cut through every layer of a coat, carrying dampness and the faint scent of sea salt. I usually began my mornings with a short walk through a few blocks from my Capitol Hill apartment to the bus stop, watching deep green maple leaves shiver in the wind, then continued on to Bellevue to finish work before taking a few days off from the hospital for graduation. The colleagues in Bellevue were an important part of this journey. They had watched me balance work and study, running between classes, labs, and project meetings. When I sent them invitations, their replies came quickly and warmly, more so than anything I had ever received from my family. "We'll be there, absolutely. We wouldn't miss your day for the world." I also invited a few close friends in Seattle, those who had been with me since my first shaky days in the master's program, who had shared sleepless nights writing reports and the nervous moments before presentations. My guest list wasn't long, but every name on it was a real connection, not just a relationship that existed on a birth certificate. One afternoon, I stopped by the campus gift shop to buy my graduation gown and cap. The gown was a deep navy purple with golden trim, the square cap with a matching tassel. I tried it on in the fitting room, looked at myself in the mirror, and couldn't help but smile. I didn't buy any elaborate accessories, just kept everything simple and clean, the same way I had moved through this academic journey. Quietly, but steadily. When I brought it home, I hung the gown and cap on the wooden hook by my bedroom door. Every time I passed by, I paused for a few seconds, lightly touching the smooth fabric, as if to remind myself that every effort had brought me to this point. I knew my family wouldn't come. Not because the 1-hour drive from Tacoma to Seattle was too far, but because in their list of priorities, my graduation had never ranked above their own plans. Still, I held onto a fragile thread of hope. Maybe they would change their minds at the last minute. Maybe they would appear unexpectedly in the crowd, like those scenes you often see in family movies. I didn't dare expect it, but I hadn't completely extinguished that hope either. The week before the ceremony, I was busy with last-minute tasks, confirming guest seating, sending reminder emails to those who had RSVP'd, preparing a short thank you speech in case I was invited to speak. I also had to finish a project report to temporarily hand over to a colleague. In the evenings, I would sit at my desk, reviewing documents while glancing at my phone lying face down beside me, waiting for a new notification from the family group chat. But there was nothing, just scattered messages about the weather in Tacoma or stories revolving around Sophie. The night before the ceremony, a light rain fell over Seattle. The patter of raindrops against the apartment's awning blended with the warm yellow light spilling from the windows across the street. I sat in my armchair, wrapped in a thin blanket, with Willow, my calico cat I had adopted in my first year of the master's program, curled in my lap. In the warm room, I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the family group chat once more. The latest message was a photo of my parents and Sophie standing in front of the Honolulu airport gate, with a large "Welcome to Hawaii" sign behind them. They were all smiling brightly, holding plane tickets and brand new suitcases. Not a single word mentioned me. Not one wish of luck for tomorrow. I stared at the photo for a while, willing myself not to sink into disappointment. I set the phone down on the table, stood up to smooth out my graduation gown, and checked the bag holding my cap and tassel. Then I turned off all the lights, leaving only a small lamp in the corner, slipped under the blanket, and lay still in the dark. In my mind, I could still see the image of empty family seats, but somewhere, there was still a dim glimmer, a light of hope, however small, that tomorrow might be different. I closed my eyes, listened to the rain outside the window, and told myself that no matter what happened, I would walk across that stage with my head held high. That evening, as the lights around Lake Union began to spill golden reflections across the water, I left a small gathering with friends to return to my apartment and change. I hung my graduation gown and cap neatly, as if bidding them a temporary goodbye before the emotional morning ahead. Then I opened my closet and took out a knee-length navy blue dress, simple but perfectly fitted, layered with a light cream coat to guard against Seattle's early summer chill. At night, the city always wore a thin veil of mist that slipped through every street, making all the lights look softer and more luminous. Tonight's event was the annual public health fundraising gala, held in the Grand Hall of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, a landmark in the heart of the city that I had walked past countless times but never stepped inside. The reception area glowed under towering crystal chandeliers, their lights scattering across the polished white marble floor. Round banquet tables draped in pristine white cloths filled the room. Each centerpiece a bouquet of white roses interlaced with softly flickering scented candles. Guests in formal attire mingled, laughter and conversation blending with the gentle chime of wine glasses meeting. I was guided to my table, positioned near the stage where the organizers had seated special guests and media representatives. I sat beside a few colleagues from Bellevue and several members of the research team. Initially, I thought I was simply attending to support the cause and network with the community, but the formal atmosphere, along with the presence of reporters and television cameras, made me realize the evening might turn out to be far more significant than I had expected. When the program began, the MC introduced the year's most impactful projects. Short videos played one after another on the large screen. Nurses caring for patients in remote areas, volunteers handing out flyers on disease prevention, schoolchildren learning proper hand-washing techniques. I flinched slightly when I saw myself appear in one of the clips wearing a white lab coat, standing in the Bellevue lab, jotting notes on a board while explaining to a group of students in Spokane how bacteria spread. The MC's voice followed over the speakers. Our next project has made remarkable progress in preventing disease across communities. This is a passionate young team that has worked tirelessly to protect the health of residents throughout the state. He smiled, then turned toward me. And the person who has led this project since its very beginning, Natalie Carter. Applause swelled throughout the hall, and the stage lights locked on me. The MC gestured for me to come forward. My heart raced as I rose from my seat, weaving between tables toward the small set of steps leading up to the stage. Como News and King 5 television cameras immediately swung in my direction, the red lights of live broadcast glowing. I caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd, smiling and nodding encouragement. On stage, the CEO of the sponsoring organization, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a tailored gray suit, took the microphone. He shook my hand firmly, his grip warm, before addressing the room. We believe this research will save thousands of lives in the decades to come. And tonight, we are thrilled to announce a $5 million grant to expand this project statewide, reaching even more communities. He paused briefly, smiling at me. This young woman will change public health in Washington forever. Applause and cheers echoed through the hall. I kept my smile, bowed my head in thanks, But in that moment, an image flickered through my mind: the empty seats at my graduation that morning, silent and cold. I thought to myself, maybe this was the moment I had truly wished they were there. At that same time, across the Pacific Ocean in a luxury hotel along Waikiki Beach in Hawaii, my parents and Sophie were having breakfast at the hotel's buffet restaurant. Golden sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows, glinting off plates of fresh fruit and brightly colored glasses of juice. Sophie was holding her phone to take a photo of her breakfast when the television mounted in the corner switched to a live segment from King 5-inch Seattle. At first, they only glanced at the screen until they saw me, in my navy blue dress, walking up onto the stage. The voice from the television rang out clearly. "Natalie Carter. This young woman will change public health in Washington forever." The camera cut to a close-up of my face, lit from above, my smile and eyes full of confidence. My father set his knife and fork down, silent. My mother leaned slightly forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. Sophie stopped eating, glancing from the television to my parents, then back again. For a few seconds, the table that had been filled with chatter fell so quiet that the only sound was the clink of a spoon on a plate at the table next to them. I don't know exactly what they felt in that moment, but I can imagine a mix of surprise and discomfort, and perhaps something that resembled regret. They had chosen Hawaii instead of standing in that hall tonight. But whether they were there or not, I would still walk onto my stage. When the gala ended, I stepped down from the stage to warm congratulations and firm handshakes. The phone in my pocket buzzed nonstop, notifications from the family group chat lighting up the screen. I didn't open them right away. I wanted to savor this moment just a little longer, a moment I had created for myself and no one else. That night, when I finally made it back to my apartment in Capitol Hill, the heels I wore still carried the imprint of an entire day's worth of steps. I dropped my bag onto the sofa and sank into the armchair by the window. Outside, Seattle's night streets were quieter than usual, the lights from nearby cafes glowing faintly through a thin veil of mist. I hadn't even taken off my coat when the phone on the table began to buzz over and over. The screen lit up in the dark living room, displaying a stream of new messages from the family group chat. The first was from my mother, typed hastily but still full of question marks. "Why didn't you tell us?" Then Sophie's message followed. "OMG, you're on television?" Attached was a screenshot from King 5's news segment, showing me on stage with the public health organization's logo behind me. My father's was the last in the chain, short and abrupt. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." I let the screen light up, then go dark again, without typing a single word. On any other day, those 3 messages might have made my eyes sting. But tonight, with the image of those empty family seats at my morning graduation still vivid in my mind, they felt like looking at a photograph taken too late. Everything had already happened. And their presence now couldn't change a thing. I set the phone aside, letting it keep buzzing whenever someone else sent a message. I opened my laptop, intending to send a few thank you emails to colleagues and the gala organizers, but the moment I logged in, social media notifications flooded my screen. My Instagram and Twitter, now X, were filled with tags, posts, and direct messages. A colleague had recorded the moment the CEO announced the $5 million grant and posted it with the caption, "Proud to work with this brilliant mind every day, number Seattle Health Hero." That hashtag number Seattle Health Hero, at first I thought it was just a playful congratulations, but when I clicked it, I saw it climbing into Seattle's top 3 trending topics. All night, images of me on stage, shaking the CEO's hand, or giving an interview backstage were shared again and again. Accounts from universities, public health organizations, and local news outlets joined in, turning the hashtag into a steady, unstoppable stream. A Seattle online news site published an article titled, "Young Researcher from UW Leads $5 million Public Health Initiative." The photo showed me with my head slightly bowed and a smile, stage lights casting a warm glow across my face. In the comments section, people I had worked with on past projects left congratulations, recalling nights I stayed up past midnight to finish reports or stood in the rain handing out community health flyers. Amid the flood of notifications, I saw private messages from relatives, people I rarely heard from, offering praise, asking how I'd been, or suggesting we meet up next time you're in Tacoma. A distant cousin even sent me a screenshot of the extended family group chat where my name was being mentioned over and over, accompanied by clapping and firework emojis. I read them all, but didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a video call from Sophie. Her face filled the screen, blonde hair pulled back into a high ponytail, the balcony of a hotel framing a faint view of Hawaii's beach at night behind her. I let it ring until it stopped on its own. Just seconds later, another message came through from her. Nat, seriously, why didn't you say anything? We would have been there. I stared at the words for a long moment before letting out a small, dry laugh. I knew the answer, and so did they. If they had truly wanted to be there, they would have made that choice from the very start. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and carried it out to the small balcony of my apartment. From there, I could see the glow of the Space Needle in the distance. The night air was cool, laced with the damp scent of Seattle rain. In my hand, my phone kept lighting up in bursts, messages from friends, colleagues, even my former academic advisor. Each one was a note of congratulations, a word of encouragement, a photo from the news broadcast. The only messages I hadn't revisited were those 3 from the family group chat, still untouched since I'd set the phone down. Close to midnight, a new notification appeared. My father had just posted a photo on Facebook, a screenshot from the gala captioned, "So proud of our daughter Natalie Carter tonight." The post had already gathered dozens of likes and comments from his friends. I scrolled past it without reacting. In my mind, there was a strange gap between the reality I lived and the image they were now presenting to the public. I shut my laptop and let the notification sit. Tonight, I didn't want to drown in the ache of absence or regret. I wanted to remember the applause echoing through the grand hall, the blinding light of the stage, and the genuine handshakes of the people who had actually been there. As for those messages, I would leave them where they were, at least until I knew I was ready to respond. A week after the gala, when the media lights had dimmed but the #number Seattle Health Hero still appeared here and there online, I received a short message from my mother. "Dinner this Sunday? At home. We'll cook." It came with a smiling face and a heart emoji. No apology, no mention of the graduation or the gala, just an invitation, as if the empty spaces of the past weeks had never existed. I sat looking at the screen for a while, debating whether to refuse, but eventually replied, "Okay, 6 p.m. On Sunday afternoon, I drove from Capitol Hill down to Tacoma. The familiar stretch of I-5 unfurled before me, winding through rows of deep green trees and small town signs scattered along the way. I had traveled this road hundreds of times growing up, yet today it felt like passing through a layered map of memory, each bend, each bridge conjuring images of me in the back seat, listening to Sophie chatter on about her latest victory in some competition, while my parents nodded and praised her. The house in Tacoma was unchanged. The white-painted wooden fence, the lavender bush by the front door, and the house number still tilted to one side from that windstorm years ago. My mother opened the door, giving me a perfunctory hug, her perfume as strong as ever. My father stood behind her, smiling broadly but avoiding my eyes. Sophie sat at the dining table, golden hair loose around her shoulders, one hand scrolling her phone, the other swirling a glass of wine. Dinner began with my mother's lasagna, Sophie's favorite. As she served it, her voice carried the practiced ease of a story carefully edited. "We've always believed in you, Natalie. Always knew you'd do something great." I gave a thin smile and lifted my water glass to my lips. In my mind, the words, "Don't make this about you," flashed as vividly as if I had just read them this morning. My father nodded, adding, "That's right. It's just, we all have different ways of showing it." I didn't reply, focusing instead on cutting into the lasagna, watching the cheese stretch across the knife. The table settled into a brief lull until Sophie set down her phone, rested her elbow on the table, and tilted her head toward me. "Nat, I've been thinking about starting a business. I have an idea for a health app for young people. But to get started, I'll need funding." She paused, smiling, eyes gleaming as though expecting agreement. "And I know you just got that big grant for your project, so I thought if you could invest just a small part of it." I set my fork down and straightened my back. "Sophie, that grant is for public health research, not personal use. And even if it were my own money, starting a business is a serious decision that needs a clear plan." My tone stayed calm but firm enough for her to understand. My mother quickly stepped in, her voice coated with diplomacy but edged with subtle pressure. "You know, supporting family is also a way of investing in the future. Sophie has so much potential." I turned to her and replied slowly. "I've been investing in my own future for the past 10 years. Alone. No one at this table gave me a dime when I had to work and study to survive in Seattle." My father took a sip of wine, still avoiding my gaze. Sophie picked up her phone again, tapped a few times, then sighed as if I had just ruined a flawless plan. I quietly continued eating, letting the silence stretch. As dinner wound down, my mother tried steering the conversation toward family memories, but every sentence felt like listening to a rewritten version of the past, a past where the times I was left behind simply didn't exist. I nodded and smiled politely, but in my mind, I was building an invisible wall. Before I left, Sophie stood to give me a quick hug, then murmured, "I still hope you'll think about helping me." I replied only, "I'll think about it," though I already knew my answer. Stepping out onto the porch, the Tacoma night air carried a faint trace of sea salt. As I drove away from the old street, I felt with absolute clarity that I had just crossed a line, the line between keeping the peace and protecting myself. Driving back from Tacoma to Seattle that night, the streetlights stretched ahead like a faint ribbon of gold in the darkness. A light drizzle fell against the windshield, breaking into blurred circles under the glow of each lamp. I turned on the radio, letting the soft background music play, but my mind was still tangled with the words from the dinner table. My mother saying, "We've always believed in you." Sophie talking about startup capital, my father silent as though everything was perfectly fine. They all blended into one distorted hum, like white noise, exhausting, yet familiar. By the time I merged onto the I-90 bridge, I realized something. If I said yes, if I agreed to back Sophie, the story would fall right back into the same rut. I would once again become the fixer, the daughter responsible for patching over the gaps my family had created for themselves. And this time, it wouldn't just be about money, it would be a silent admission that all those years I fought on my own meant nothing. The next day, I got a private message from Sophie. "So, have you thought about the app idea? We could be a team, Nat. Family business." I sat in the living room, coffee still steaming in my cup, Seattle's pale morning light filtering through the window. I read the message 3 times, then set the phone down on the table and took a deep breath. I called her directly. Sophie's voice came through, bright and expectant. "Nat, I knew you woo," but I cut in, gently yet firmly. "Sophie, I'm glad you finally see what I'm capable of. But I'm not here to fix the past by paying for the future you've chosen." Done. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, then Sophie let out a short laugh, half surprised, half bitter. "Wow, you really have changed." I replied, I just don't want to go back to being the one who takes the hits." My voice wasn't raised, it didn't waver, but it was clear. After the call, my mother sent me a long message, saying that family is about helping each other, that I was being selfish and letting money cloud my judgment. I didn't respond. I left it there, unread again, not deleted, kept as proof of the choice I had made. That evening, when I stepped out onto the balcony and looked down over the streets of Capitol Hill, the air felt different, lighter, wider. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. I didn't feel the need to justify it or soften its edges. I just let it stand. I knew that from this point on, every dinner, every invitation, every "just help me out a little" would no longer be treated as my obligation. And while that might make the distance between me and my family clearer than ever, I also understood that this distance was the safe boundary I needed to keep living a life that was truly my own. In the weeks after my conversation with Sophie, I poured all my energy into my work at the hospital and on the research project. Seattle moved into the early days of autumn cool air, scattered rain, but skies still clear enough to glimpse the faint silhouette of Mount Rainier in the distance. I began taking longer trips, not just around Seattle but out to Spokane, about a 4-hour drive east, and Portland, just 3 hours south. Each trip brought a sense of renewal, the hum of the tires on the highway, a hot coffee in my hand, and the feeling that I was leaving a real mark on places I had never set foot in before. In Spokane, I worked with local teams to launch disease prevention programs for rural communities. We operated out of small community centers, speaking directly with residents, listening to their stories, and finding solutions that truly fit their needs. In Portland, I partnered with nonprofits to bring health education into schools, creating lively, hands-on workshops that felt both practical and personal. Each successful project felt like another sturdy brick laid onto the road. I was building the road I had chosen, constructed with my own hands, and that no one could take from me. Alongside the fieldwork, I began writing a personal blog. At first, I only meant to share knowledge about public health, but gradually, I realized there was another part of the story that people needed to hear, the part about growing up in a family that played favorites, about the feeling of being left behind, and about the journey to reclaim my own worth. I wrote about graduation days where no one from my family showed up, about moments of unfair comparison, and about the exact point when I decided to draw my boundaries. To my surprise, those posts struck a deep chord. Dozens, then hundreds of comments came in from people I had never met, sharing that they had lived through something similar. One person wrote, "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Thank you for saying it out loud." Another said, "These words gave me the courage to say no to my family for the first time." Howie 5. It was within this new network, colleagues, always willing to lend a hand, friends who were ready to listen, and even readers I'd never met but who felt a deep connection, that I found what I had always been missing. A family built on respect and trust. No one here saw me as a means to an end. They saw me as a whole person, with both strengths and flaws. Looking back, I realized that healing didn't come from my biological family changing. It came from allowing myself to step outside that circle. I stopped waiting for validation from people unwilling to give it, and instead, I gave it to myself every time I completed a project, every time I helped a community improve its health, every time I received a message from someone saying my story had given them strength. Seattle was no longer just the place I lived. It had become the foundation for a new life. Every morning, stepping out of my apartment in Capitol Hill and seeing the familiar rain-slick streets, I felt with certainty that I was moving in the right direction. No more shadow of comparison, no more pressure to prove myself to my family. I moved forward with a quiet but steadfast peace. A year later, when I opened my email on an autumn morning, I saw the subject line in bold. "Congratulations! You've been selected for Forbes 30 Under 30. I read it over and over to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The feeling wasn't an explosion of joy, but a deep, still calm, like I had just confirmed something I had always known. The path I chose was the right one. On the day Forbes interviewed me, they asked, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned from this journey?" I looked straight into the camera, took a slow, deep breath, and answered, "You can't force someone to see your worth, but you can build a life where that worth cannot be denied. Once you do that, recognition, whether it comes or not, no longer matters." Shuin. When the article went live, a photo of me in a navy suit, standing in the middle of an international public health conference hall, spread across the internet. I received hundreds of congratulatory messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had once read my blog. The family group chat remained silent. I no longer waited for them. That afternoon, I drove south, leaving Seattle for a speaking engagement in Tacoma. The road stretched ahead, golden sunset light shimmering across the water as the Tacoma Narrows Bridge came into view. I rolled the window down, letting the ocean wind rush in, carrying salt and cool air that cleared my mind completely. No music, no other sound but the wind and the hum of the engine. I just kept driving, feeling every beat of my own heart. I've come to realize that healing doesn't mean going back, clinging to, or trying to fix a relationship worn down by years of favoritism and neglect. Healing is about moving forward, building a life where you are truly valued. And more importantly, it's about allowing yourself to be happy without needing anyone's permission. On the bridge, with the wind tossing my hair, I smiled a calm, light, and complete smile. This life is mine. And I chose right. If you grew up in a family where love always came with conditions, where you had to work twice as hard but it was still never enough, where your successes were diminished simply because they didn't align with their expectations, remember this: your true worth isn't found in anyone's praise or recognition. It's in the person you are becoming every day, in every step you take forward, in every time you stand back up after falling. You have the right to step out of the cycle of hurt, the right to set boundaries, the right to rewrite your story in the way you deserve. Find the people who value you, not for the role you play in their lives, but for who you truly are. Give yourself the opportunities, open the doors they never believed you could reach. And one day, when you look back, you'll smile and realize that choosing to walk away wasn't a loss, it was the greatest gift you ever gave yourself. It was the beginning of a life where you are respected, loved, and no longer need permission to be happy. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next one.